Bishop Tom, it's a delight to have you at the Center of Theological Inquiry in Princeton. You've come from leading a major diocese of the Church of England and sitting in the House of Lords as a bishop in the upper chamber of the British Parliament. And you've come to this quiet centre for scholarship. How's that transition been for you?
It was quite an odd thing to start with. I'd been looking forward to coming here, but I don't think I'd realised the almost physical reaction I would have simply to stopping and being still. It took me a while before I could sort of sleep properly and so on. But the sense has been of extraordinary refreshment that, yes, the rest of my life is sort of on hold somewhere else, and I'm aware that it's there and I shall return to it. But this has enabled me to go down deep into stuff which before I was having to skate over rather rapidly. Things which have been in the back of my mind, which can now come to the front of my mind, and which I can now explore at leisure. And as far as I'm concerned, the Church desperately needs theology, and it needs some of its leaders at least, to be able to do this kind of thing, to come back, hopefully, with something of a fresh word into the situation. So I don't see it as an either-or. I see it as a necessary step back and deepening in order to return and get on with that work.
So the Centre offers you, as a bishop of the Church, an opportunity to deepen your ministry of teaching and reflection for the life and mission of the Church.
I hope so. And of course, these things are always a risk. Nobody knows when you send somebody off to sit at a desk for 4 months or whatever. They may think some crazy thoughts and you may not like what they come back with. That is always the risk which we all take. But I think the idea that one should just carry on doing what one is doing and be even more busy and fill the filing cabinets even fuller and write more letters and emails all the time. Most of us know in our heart of hearts that that's actually a recipe for shallowness and for real failure, actually. And a failure not only for ourselves but for the next generation. We have to teach but also to model a mode of a thinking spirituality and a thinking Christian mission, which will then sustain the Church in the no doubt complicated days to come.
What is the Centre offering you as a research scholar?
One of the things which has been a real delight has been being right next door to one of the great theological libraries in the whole world, and knowing that when I come upon some arcane reference to an odd article or a book I'd never heard of, it isn't a matter of, oh well, maybe I would be able to look that up next time I'm somewhere where I could do that. It's, well, let's find it right now and have it on the desk within a matter of minutes and actually be reading it and following lines of thought. So it's that sense of possibility, but also of space and collegiality. I think we've got a good balance here at CTI, if I can say so, because most of the time we are simply by ourselves, and it's an extraordinarily quiet building. One knows that there are other people around, but actually it's very unobtrusive. People flit to and fro, but then we have our times when we meet for prayer once a week, we have our times when we meet for lunch once a week, and then when we do bump into each other when we're getting a coffee or whatever, there's a context within which new conversations can happen across the theological disciplines, and that's always exciting. People that you wouldn't necessarily have been in conversation with nevertheless have something which sparks off other possibilities, other ideas. The only real problem is it's going to be very hard to tie it all up within 4 months. I think a year and 4 months might be a bit more reasonable, but there we are.
Tell us about your major study on the Apostle Paul, which you're conducting while you're in residence as senior member at the Centre.
Right. Well, I've for a long time been looking forward to writing about Paul's theology, and I've known for a long time how I wanted to shape the centre of the theological exposition of Paul in terms of his view of God, God's people and God's future, in technical language, monotheism, election and eschatology, each of them reworked around Christ and the Spirit. And I really do believe that that is the way to get in, as it were, all the data, and to do so elegantly and in a historically wise and creative way. But what I've been able to do here is to step back from that, to explore what I have called in my other books Paul's worldview in a depth which I hadn't done before, the symbolic universe which made sense of Paul's world. And it's been fascinating as I've explored that in much more detail to see the way in which, if you look at Paul's Jewish worldview, you have all these cultural symbols of circumcision and the different works of the law, the food laws and the Sabbath and lots of stuff in that line. Paul has simply said, we're not going there. That's not what defines who we are. And so you discover that the central symbol of his worldview is not stuff like that. It is this community itself, this united community across traditional ethnic, class, cultural, gender boundaries. This community is the symbol of all that God is doing and of where Paul's worldview is. Now, if that is so, and I'm still working out the detail of it, but it seems to make sense, then what we're saying is that actually theology itself has to play a much bigger role within the study of Paul and within Christianity thereafter than it had before in either Judaism or in the pagan world, because theology, the study of who this God is and why this community is what it is, has got to play a worldview supporting role in a way which it really doesn't in the same way in other theologies. And I think what we're looking at, therefore, in Paul is actually the birth of Christian theology as a new sort of exercise. And I find that really very exciting. I'm eager to share this news with my systematic friends who probably say, yes, we could have told you that, but I think I've come to it by a different route. And the whole business of worldview gets us into the question of social world, gets us into the question of Paul within his wider society. And what I'm trying, therefore, to do is to integrate two very different discourses about Paul. One which has gone on a long time about how do we describe Paul within his social world as a sort of historical thing, preempting theology. And the other is how do we do his theology, preempting all that stuff. And I'm trying to say, actually, these two feed into each other. There's a larger whole, and we can see how they belong. And I hope that that will be creative for the discipline of Pauline studies as well as a whole.